welcome, welcome. If you're just joining in, welcome to our second guest session. My name is Lale. I'm part of the Course Hero team, and I'm very happy to welcome you to today's session. Congratulations for surviving week one of AI Academy. I know it can be a lot of resources, a lot of happening all at once. If you're feeling like there is a lot to digest, I am sure you're not alone. So don't worry. It's a normal experience of this course, but past week two, it gets a little easier, I promise. So welcome to this session. Just a kind of few reminders of how these sessions work. Um, your participation is very valuable. The more you put in, the more you take out. So feel free to use the chat to ask questions to other participants, to share ideas. Maybe you've seen things in the course already or things that you're using in your own classroom. Our Q&A box at the very bottom of the Zoom screen is open if you would like to ask Annette any questions. We will have plenty of time at the end for a Q&A, so feel free to ask our speakers some questions. Very big welcome to Annette, who will be leading today's session on engaging students through AI activities. Annette is an associate professor in the English department at the University of Pittsburgh, where she teaches graduate and undergraduate courses on writing and digital composition. Her research is at the intersection of computation and writing and speaks to the fields as literary studies, digital humanities, computer science, education, and law. So you can see why this is the perfect person to lead today's session. Annette is the author of Coding Literacy, How Computer Programming is Changing Writing. So for the writers in the room and anyone who teaches composition, bring all of your questions. Thanks so much for joining us today, Annette, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lily. And thank you all for being here. I'm super excited to talk to you about AI. I have been thinking about AI for quite a while, several years, and I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Hopefully folks can see that. I've been thinking about AI for a few years. And prior to that, as Lale said, I was interested in how people write for computers. That is how they move through coding computers. But now I'm interested in how computers are writing for people. That is through AI, generative AI, large language models. So this intersection of computation and writing is super interesting to me. I'm really excited to talk to you about it. And especially since I've done a lot of these kinds of workshops and I always learn from them because the ground is changing so fast, and there's so much to learn about different populations of students, different teachers doing innovative things. So please share all of the things that you're thinking about and doing and questions and things like that. And there's a few specific opportunities that I have in the workshop today for you to share in the chat, but always feel free to do that. Okay, so the outline of this workshop, and you can follow along with the slides here. There's a link and a QR code. I like to do that just so you have a copy of that, so you can follow links, etc., that come up in the workshop, but also for accessibility reasons. If I move through something a little too quickly, then you can always scroll back on your own version. So I'll keep this up for a minute for you to get that on your own screens if you would like. So the outline of the workshop is we're going to first talk a little bit about what students think about AI. I have some data to share with you. And then how you can talk to students about AI. I'm sure many of you are already doing that. How can you use AI to support authentic assessment? And that these last two will be kind of the bulk of our conversation because they will lead into your assignments then for this week. And how can you design assignments and assessments integrating AI? I'll share some examples, some approaches, things like that, that hopefully you will find useful. This is the same QR code if you didn't catch it from the last slide. So the goal today is to help you use AI for generative activities and assessment in your courses. I mean that pun kind of intentionally, right? Generative AI. But I really do think that AI can be generative in our classes. And so I'm hoping that we can work together on this. Please, share things as you think of them, participate. As Lale said, the more you put into this, the more you get out of it. So I'm really hoping that we all get a lot out of this session today. So the first section of what I want to talk about is, what do students think about AI? So this is data from a survey that I gave to University of Pittsburgh composition students. I direct the composition program at University of Pittsburgh. So I was very interested from the very beginning. I started giving surveys in December of 2022, right after ChatGPT came out, to try to kind of get a sense on the ground of what our students are doing. And so I got about 315 responses. I'm citing the most recent 2 surveys just because those are, I think, the most relevant to our conversations today. So I asked an open-ended question. Why are students using AI text generators? The question was something like, why are you using it? What do you think about it? And here's just a selection. I won't read through all of these, but a selection of some of the reasons why they're using AI text generators like ChatGPT. And it is primarily ChatGPT that they're using right now. They use them to make sure my writing is all in the same tense. They're getting ideas. They're dumbing down complex topics. They want to make their writing better, more concise. So it's like kind of on the end part, polishing up their writing. Again, ideas, the ideas kind of came up a lot. They also use it for formatting, like what format does IEEE use? What format does MLA use, et cetera. Proofreading, editing, seeing different edits of the same paragraph. So that is, they're using it to kind of give them a few different choices of tone, language, things like that. And then if I have an idea of what I want to say, but cannot figure out how to put that sentence into words, I will give a description of what I want to say, and ChatGPT will give me options of how I can word it. So those are some of the ways that students are already using it. Why are students not using AI text generators? And what I found is that quite a few students aren't using them, and for very specific reasons. So it may be because they don't want to get in trouble for plagiarism. We have at Pitt, like I'm sure you do at many of your institutions, a kind of policy about academic integrity that kind of encompasses AI, even if it's not explicitly encompassed in there. They know, many of them know that LLMs or AI can be unreliable, can be abused in a way. They have ethical qualms about it. They think it might be unethical. Some of them really want to learn. So, and they say that specifically, I prefer writing myself because I like the process. If I use text generators, I know I won't be growing in my own skill. Some of them actually have kind of ideological reasons why they're not using them. I'm not a huge fan of AI as a concept. I don't want to contribute to its data by inputting my writing. They know it's unreliable, inaccurate. I would never trust a piece of writing produced by a software like this. So that's a kind of big picture of how students, at least at Pitt, are responding to this. And if you write to me, I'm happy to share the survey that I have, the survey questions, if you wanted to give a survey to your own institution too. Students are interested in learning more about AI. Many of them are. And they recognize that it may have a large impact on how we write in the future. They see it as a potential professional thing that they might need to know how to use. They want to know how to use them for research as a starting point. They're curious. They are concerned or want to know about overall ethical implications. And they think it could be fun. And if you've played around with ChatGPT or other LLMs, then you probably know that it actually can be really fun. So that's, again, a little bit more context. So what do your students think of AI? If you've had conversations with them, feel free to share that in the chat, what your sense are for your own students. I get the sense that that different students are taking this up in different ways, and University of Pittsburgh is a particular kind of institution. So, so that's important to note. And I do think it's important to talk with your students then about how they're using it. Students do want, and I think this has been universal for all of the institutions that I've talked to about this, students want clear policy about AI use in their courses. So about 95% of Pitt students said they either strongly agree or agree that composition instructors should provide clear policies about how students are allowed to use computer programs in their work for the course. So whatever you do, make sure that you're providing clear guidance about how they should be using AI and how they should not be using AI. They really appreciate that clarity. So at this point, I'm curious actually who has an AI policy already in their course. And Lale has a poll set up for you all to take so that we can see. All right, I'm going to take the poll too. Well, this is useful to know. So a number of people want to but haven't done it yet. In the list of resources that I'll give you at the end of this session, I have links to policies and suggested policies that I use or that I've suggested for University of Pittsburgh, and then also a huge collection of policies that you may pick and choose from. And I think probably you'll be talking about policies in other sessions for the AI Academy too. So thank you so much for answering that. Okay, so I think one of the main things here is that you should be talking to your students about AI. Some of them don't know about it, in which case they probably should have some kind of introduction to it. Some of them already know about it, but they don't know enough about it. They don't have significant AI literacy. And some of them are curious. Some of them may be using it in ways that are not aligned with your goals in the course. So regardless, I think for all of these reasons, it's important to talk to your students about AI. So how do you do that? You can talk with students about what they're doing or thinking by having discussions in class and just kind of getting like a read of the room, right? You can offer anonymous surveys. So that's what I did at the program level at University of Pittsburgh. But you can also do that at the classroom level too, through using Google Forms, Qualtrics, lots of other ways that you may have. Ask them to interview each other. So like say in a small little focus group in a class, they can talk to each other about it. And sometimes they may be able to have a little bit more, they could be more candid in that and, say, well, somebody in our group said that they use it for this. And that might be helpful to kind of get that in the room without it being attached to a particular person. And other smaller kind of ways of doing focus groups. So all of this feedback, I think, is really important to help you meet your students' interests and needs, and also to help you align what your students are doing with what you would like them to be doing in your course. So how have you talked to students about AI? If you have ideas, especially if there's ideas that you have that I didn't share, please go ahead and share them in the chat. I see a lot of suggestions here about the honor code, things like that, and a lot of discussion. Yeah, I've found students are quite interested in talking about it. So here's some very specific suggestions about how to talk to students. I think it's important to teach them how AI writing works. A lot of them, even if they're using it, they don't really know how large language models work. They don't know how they can not work or how they can be really beneficial to them too. So, and the main thing here that I want to emphasize is it's okay if you don't know either, because we're all navigating this ourselves, and there's a number of resources to help you through that. So one resource that I have is a piece called Dear Students, Should You Use AI for Writing? And I worked on this with a colleague, Tim LaQuintano at Lafayette College. And this, it's like modeled kind of as an FAQ. And it's directed to students. So there's a lot of explanations of how LLMs work. And some of these are on my resource list. I've kind of curated some of them for you. There's a lot of explanations for teachers or for people who are interested in kind of digging into the technical aspects, but there's very little directed to students to help them navigate it and help them kind of decide on these things. So this particular resource is for you to share directly with your students, or for you to adapt to share with your students. We've licensed it Creative Commons so that you can adapt it in ways that you might find helpful for your own students. And this is just an excerpt from it that explains what large language models are in a hopefully relatively accessible way. You can also, this is like a much more technical version of it. It's a blog post from a blog called Understanding AI. This is one I've assigned to some of my own students who are maybe a little bit more technically inclined. And they have some really nice pictures of there about how neural networks work. So you can see on the top one, it's talking about how words become vectorized in their processing through large language models. And you can see here, like man is close to woman, king is close to queen. And there's like ways that words are spatially arranged. And this document kind of goes through with that. And then as well as the layers of neural networks. And it goes through pretty technical explanation for it, but my students were able to understand basic concepts of vectorization of words, why these things might be a little problematic, or how they work, or things like that by reading this particular blog post. My favorite way of having students kind of engage with these questions of AI is a book called You Look Like a Thing and I Love You by Janelle Shane from 2019. And that title comes from Janelle Shane is a AI researcher, and also she calls herself an AI humorist. So what she does is she kind of pokes at AI and makes it do funny things. So You Look Like a Thing and I Love You is the result of her trying to train AI on pickup lines. So you can see how this is like, that title is following a kind of pattern of a pickup line, but it's not a pickup line that is likely to work. And so in this particular book, she's got a lot of really cartoon kind of drawings. This little computer shows up all the time. And here in this particular one, she's showing the difference between artificial general intelligence, which is sometimes called AGI, and artificial narrow intelligence, or ANI. And that's a pretty, it's a nice, clear explanation of a lot of different complex concepts in AI. So I often assign my students chapters 1 through 3 of this, and it reads pretty fast. Even my 10-year-old read this book and really liked it. So it's pretty fun. She also has a blog called the AI Weirdness blog. And this is just a recent post that she made where she's kind of prodding the LLMs and seeing what comes out of it. So here she's trolling chatbots with made up memes. So this shows if you have students kind of do this, you could have them do this like in a class activity or something like that. Take ChatGPT and ask it to explain a meme that they've just made up. This is not a meme, the snowbonk meme. And so it will actually hallucinate a kind of response and will make up something about this meme, even though it doesn't exist. So this is a really good example of how to show students the ways that AI can hallucinate or make up things, even if they don't exist. Okay, so now I want to go into the meat of what we're talking about here, about how to use AI to support authentic assessment. I'm just gonna kind of look through the chat a little bit. Well, this is great. Thank you so much for sharing all of these things. This is super helpful. Okay, so what I want us to do right now is to take a few minutes to reflect on what you want students to get out of your course. Because the main thing I want us to think through here is how to align your AI policies, your AI assignments, activities, etc., to the goals that you have for your course. So what skills and processes should your students know at the end of your course? How do you communicate those outcomes to students? That is through your syllabus, through learning goals, through whatever, through conversations. How have you taught these skills and processes in the past? For instance, have you used annotated bibliographies? Have you used essays, explaining sort of certain historical trends or whatever? And what role writing has played in helping students achieve these outcomes that you want out of your class. So at this point, we aren't talking about AI, we're just assessing the kinds of things that you have been doing in your course, say, prior to ChatGPT. So just take a few minutes to reflect, and you can share in the chat if you'd like, or you can just write down on your own computer, on notes, etc. Okay, maybe one more minute and then I'll move on. All right. Thank you so much for sharing those things. It's really helpful for me to know too. For all of the goals that you're doing, some of the goals are coming from the outside, say accrediting bodies or things like that. Goals that you have yourself. A lot of us are thinking about critical thinking. We're thinking about mastery of skills too. I think AI can be used in a lot of those different contexts. Somebody suggested, as a study buddy, asking questions, stuff like that. Those are excellent ideas for how to integrate AI in an explicit and kind of positive way in your classes. So I'm going to give you a few examples then that I know of for using AI to support learning outcomes. And so as I move through these examples, think about the learning outcomes that you want students to get out of your own course. And some of them I'm drawing on a few different resources that have come up to support AI teaching. And I've linked to 3 of them here. These are, again, also in the resource list that I will provide for you at the end of the session here. One of them, TextGenEd, is one that was co-edited by me and a couple of other people. All of these are open for you to use. They include directions, teacher reflections, things like that. So you can kind of read through and get some ideas and then adapt it to your own space. And so I'll run through a few of the examples from these resources, including some other resources that I've seen and found some compelling examples. So one of the things that you can do is do a human versus machine contest. And I saw somebody in the chat had mentioned that they were having their grad students write a paper and then have an AI write a paper and then comparing the two. So that can work on, reading skills, critical thinking, like what's wrong, its critique, all that kind of stuff. That's great. And this is an example of a translation assignment. So Tim LaQuintano asks his students at Lafayette College to change the reading level on a document manually. This is a very common technical writing skill, so that you take a fairly complex document, distill it into an executive summary or a 5th grade level reading, etc. And then they do it by using an LLM like ChatGPT, and then students compare the results about what's missing, like looking through analysis of sentence structures, things like that, so that they both better understand questions of reading level and complexity with writing, as well as understanding how they might be able to use this tool of AI in order to do this kind of translational work. And this is one of the things that LLMs tend to be quite good at, is kind of moving through translations, especially of complexity of documents. And you saw that in one of the student responses that I shared earlier, that students like it to dumb down complex topics for them. Another example that I really appreciate is having students develop good questions with AI. I know a number of classes will often ask, especially for training classes, there's like internships, there's, talking with somebody who is already an expert in your field, say in nursing or whatever, that you want to talk to somebody who's a practicing nurse and think about the kinds of things that they do as they kind of move through this apprenticeship or this training, right? And one of the problems always with the assignment of having students interview an expert is that students are maybe not already practiced at interviewing. You want to make sure that they're not wasting the expert's time, especially if you're sending them out there. And so this is an assignment that has students walk through interviewing with an AI chatbot before they interview a human expert. And in that process, they learn how to, they can kind of set it up like act like you are, and then give all sorts of criteria for this person. So the chatbot is like acting as that person. and then they can try out their questions, and the chatbot will respond. Now, that's not going to be a perfect response. It's not a substitute for an interview, but it's a rehearsal for a real life interview, so that the time that they spend with the actual expert then is better spent. Students can also use AI to do peer review. So this is an assignment from Antonio Bird in TextGen Ed. And this is, Antonio has them move through he has them take some questions that are already like kind of preset good questions about like, here's what a good paper looks like. Here are the kinds of peer review questions that I might normally queue up if you're doing in-class peer review student and student. And then he has them load that into the LLM and have them respond, has the LLM respond to their work, and then they kind of evaluate that feedback and then revise accordingly from that. Now, you could also have the students themselves come up with those questions. And in so doing, they would be able to engage with, what are the things that I want feedback from? And that allows students to kind of have a little more ownership over their work and what kinds of feedback they want. So it's not just turning it in and saying, hey, give me feedback, right? That allows them to kind of articulate their own goals, or to kind of match up with the goals that you might be already articulating in the course, and so that they can kind of recognize that alignment, set up the LLM to respond appropriately, and then they can get feedback. And of course, the advantage of getting feedback from an LLM is that it can be immediate, and they can respond to it very quickly. But of course, they need to be kind of scaffolded a little bit to know that the feedback may have some issues. They should be thinking critically about it, right? And not just kind of absorbing it and responding uncritically. Another way you can use AI is by using it as an adversary to strengthen arguments. So if you are in a class where you're having students make arguments, say in a class that deals with rhetoric, or making arguments about history or anything like that, a lot of times students will kind of see their own argument, but they can't really see beyond and see kind of a more expansive perspective. And so if you, this particular assignment by Justin Lewis and Ted Wayland sets up the LLM so that students can test out their arguments, and they prompt the LLM to be an adversary, to basically push against those arguments and offer multiple different arguments. So this allows students to kind of strengthen their own arguments, consider the perspective of others, maybe consider perspectives that are not represented in the LLM, because of course the LLM isn't going to represent a kind of global, universal, all of the possible counter arguments in a particular argument. And so this is another way that you could teach some AI literacy, some rhetorical savviness, and help them improve their own work too, their own essays. You can also use AI for creative play. So the one student who suggested that they wanted to learn more about AI because it could be fun, here's a good example of how they might be able to do that. So this is a creative play. This is a fun assignment about co-authoring a children's book with text and image generation, where Brandy Easter has students compose a children's book while working both with and against AI text and image tools. And students think about controversies with publishing. So there was a kind of very prominent controversy about a children's book that was made using AI, and children's book writers were kind of up in arms about this. And so you can think about, what does it mean to offload creativity to the AI? How are we going to be working alongside these things as we move forward? And then in this particular assignment, they can play with both text and image tools. Now, you could imagine this being not just for a children's book, right? But maybe doing authorship of a like a technical manual, where you're showing anatomy or something like that, and seeing like, how does the AI generate particular images of anatomy? How are they accurate? How are they not accurate? What are the ways that you would need to adjust it? What are the advantages of using an illustrator to do this kind of scientific illustration versus using AI? And there's a lot of ways that you can have students kind of both produce the work and then kind of question the work as they move through. I used a kind of example of this, although not using images, in a class just this spring, where I had students name a very difficult to describe feeling that's a very human feeling. So a feeling of, say, they chose words like nostalgia or attachment to a sibling or fear or anxiety or things like that. And then they tried to co-write with an LLM of their choice, kind of exploring their own personal work with this feeling. And it was very interesting because some of them loved working with it and some of them really worked against it. And some of them were like, but I understood better about what I wanted to say because the LLM wasn't saying it in the way that I wanted it to. And so that kind of tension of co-authorship with the AI, I think, is a really interesting space for students to explore. So AI can also be an impetus for evaluating sources. So here's an example from Jessica Kale, and this was just from a Facebook post from an AI group, that she has students generate a lit review with an AI, and then students evaluate the accuracy of the review. Here is just another little bit more explanation for it. So they generated a lit review on some scientific concept, and then they had to evaluate the information. So that makes them kind of go through, critically engage with what is represented in the lit review. They have to do research beyond that, so they're not just taking what the AI says. And they annotate it. And as a result, she came up actually, working with all of her students, you can see the result of this visualization is kind of an interesting infographic about how accurate AI source use can be. But in the process, of course, students are engaging with the sources and the literature in order to do this assignment. And she said that in that process, the students critically evaluated the sources, but also realized that they couldn't rely on AI to do that work for them. So if students had previously been relying on that AI, that was not going to be a good choice for them moving forward. But they understood it through actually moving through the assignment and not just having their teacher tell them that. You can also use AI as an example text to critique. So this has been, a number of people have used this in really helpful ways, I think, to teach particular concepts. So one of the challenges in, say, if you're teaching any kind of class where you want to use a student example, it's hard to use a negative student example. So here's what I don't want you to do in this paper. Here's what John did. Don't do what John did. Like, obviously, this is not a really kind way to teach. Even if you kind of make it anonymous, that student can feel really bad and feel like, a negative example is made of them. One of the nice things about AI is that it doesn't have feelings. So you can use AI as an example text or critique. Now, I know a lot of us as teachers have previously generated these texts in the past. I know, for instance, I have a whole handout on misplaced modifiers of, sentences that I've written in the past that don't do it right. But this took about 30 seconds for me to have ChatGPT do, say, misplaced modifiers, which is a kind of grammatical thing that I don't like to emphasize too much, but it does come up quite a bit in my undergraduates' writing, and I like to be able to kind of let them know why it's not really an effective way to write. But this way, we have a whole bunch of examples of how that can be kind of unclear in things, but I didn't have to write them myself, and I didn't have to make patterns of students. You can also do this with introductory paragraphs. ChatGPT can write one of those, like, since the beginning of time paragraphs pretty well. And you can show students, like, okay, this is like a little general for doing this kind of thing, right? And so you can use that as a negative example for big conversation with students. So there's also ways that you can use AI in class activities. And I'll provide a few examples of that. Let me just check up on the chat if, okay. So this is interesting. A number of people are talking about math. Maybe we can have a conversation about math after this too, because math is a really different kind of, LLMs treat math differently. So how can you use AI in class activities? So one way that I think is really interesting, I like to sometimes have students do little polls in class, things like that. You can either do Poll Everywhere, which is a particular kind of tool you can sign up for and have students respond to polls. This is especially useful for very large classes, although I think Poll Everywhere has a limit to 25 responses if for the free version. You can also use a Google form very easily, have students put in open-ended things. So this is ways for students to participate anonymously in something. And you can collect open-ended answers to a question related to your course. You can then take those answers. So Google form will produce like a CSV file, which is like basically like an Excel file. You can feed that into ChatGPT or another AI and ask for themes in the responses. You can discuss those themes and what's missing. So that's a kind of nice way of digesting, especially if you have a very large class, a whole bunch of responses from students that might be a little bit more complex than say just yes, no, etc. And this idea, there's a really great blog post by Derek Bruff, 2 ideas for teaching with AI. And here's an example of how he did this in a training session. You can also have students teach AI a concept from class. So students really, I've found, enjoy when the AI is dumb and can't do something very well, and then kind of trying to teach it to do it better. For instance, I had some students actually try to teach ChatGPT Gen Z slang. And this is, one of the responses, at least when I did it. But it was really funny because, of course, they are native speakers of Gen Z slang, and I am not. But they kind of corrected it on, like, we don't use vibes anymore. We don't use the hashtags anymore, things like that. That's too long. That's not the right kind of thing. And they were kind of training ChatGPT to speak in the right way. Now, you could probably work too on, say, working with an LLM to try to train it to do math. Like, how is it not doing well? Like, can you make it do better? You might not be able to do better. And then have a conversation about, like, why is it not doing a good job with this? And of course, then you could go back to the if you've taught the way that language models work, that kind of statistical modeling of language works really well. If you know anything about theories of Wittgenstein and language and things like that, it works well for language, but it doesn't work well for math because that kind of statistical model doesn't work the same way. So what are some ways that you can integrate AI generatively into your course? So at this point, I'd like to ask you to reflect a little bit on the role that you want AI to play in your course activities, assignments, and assessments, and think through some things. So the assignments that I gave you kind of move through a few different ways of thinking about AI. And I know also you'll be thinking about remaking assignments to respond to AI for next week. And here are some questions. Again, this is from Derek Bruff. He has, if you click on this, then there's a really great kind of model of how he takes an assignment that he's used before, an essay about ciphers and coding, and remakes it. Thinks through some questions about how he would kind of redo this assignment now in the age of AI. And these are some of his leading questions about like what role the assignment is following in the course, specific learning objectives. You can see some echoes of the questions that I offered you at the very beginning of this session too. How AI might undercut the goals of this assignment. So for instance, annotated bibliographies are tough to do now because you can actually put in a whole bunch of text and ask an AI to summarize that text. And it does often a pretty good job of it. Both Claude and ChatGPT will do a pretty good job of that. So then you can think through how AI might enhance that assignment. How can you rework that assignment so that AI is integrated in kind of a more positive way? And then finally, how can you emphasize process over product? And I'm going to show you a tool. I'm going to skip to the end here and show you a tool in just a second that is one way of helping you do that. And here are some of the ways that the examples that I showed you have AI support learning outcomes. So by generating counter arguments, offering feedback, providing text or critique. These are, unauthored text that we can feel free to critique without hurting feelings. Enabling creative text or image composition. That's the kind of children's book, but you can use that concept in a lot of different ways. Translating documents, that could work across languages too. And facilitating human versus machine contests. And if you have other ideas, please feel free to share them in the chat too, so that we can all learn together. Okay, and I'm gonna move, I wanna show you, actually, I'm gonna show you those resources in just a second. But since we have a few extra minutes, I wanna show you this tool that will help you attend to writing processes over products. So this is one of the things that you'll hear a lot of us who are working in AI. I know Anna Mills is one of the people who kind of promotes this, Derek Bruff, who I cited earlier, thinking about how we might emphasize processes, the processes of writing or the processes of our class, the learning goals, things like that, over the kind of here's your final assignment. Because it's that final assignment is sometimes can be like pretty tempting for students to just use AI, like plug it in and then out comes the assignment. And here's, there are two kinds of add-ons to Google Docs that I've used now with students that I've really appreciated. So one is called Revision History and the other one is called Draftback. And those are, again, on the resource sheet that I'll give you. So the way that Revision History works is it adds a bar to the top of Google Docs with basic statistics like time spent writing, number of deletions and copy paste, things like that. So you can see a screenshot of what that bar looks like. And here is an example. This is my document, Dear Students, Should You Use AI for Writing? And you can see here, active writing time, 6 hours, writing session 23. It shows all the different times that I've worked on it, which is pretty interesting, right? And then you can see here, you can actually play this and it will play through a kind of video of the document actually being composed. You can set this up to play 8 times as fast so that you're not just like watching it in real time, right? But you can see how, I like to think of myself as a reasonably expert writer. And so you can see the way that I jump around the document, I expand this sentence, I have some notes, and then I move through here and there, things like that. And I think that's really helpful for students to see because it can foster conversations about writing processes rather than just focusing on the policing of the product of writing. So I don't advocate for AI detectors. Those are not particularly reliable. They can create a kind of surveillance vibe with students. It's not, it's not really a good way to kind of support their writing. But thinking about these kinds of programs that record the processes of writing actually opens up a lot of really interesting conversations about writing processes or composing processes. And you can do this with anything in Google Docs. And there's, there's specifics about what you have to do with it. They don't have to necessarily add on the plugin, only you do, but they have to give you edit access and things like that. So those are some of the things that I like about those particular processes. And I am going to show you now, here's the helpful links. So you can visit that resource now if you want. Here's the QR code. And here's just a collection of just like maybe the most kind of helpful links and some of the things that I've cited here in this presentation. And now I think we have time for Q&A. Okay, I'm looking through. There's a whole lot. Some of the links won't open. Okay. Great. Thank you, Lale, for doing that. Let me look through some of the questions here. Okay, one question here. Do you tell students which AI system to use or give suggestions? That's a really good question. I think for some assignments, it's really useful to tell them which ones to use. One of the things that I found is that students, by default, they always go to ChatGPT because that's the most famous one. That's the one they know. And they have free access to ChatGPT 3.5. ChatGPT 4, of course, is the paid version. But that's where they'll go by default. And that's fine. It's a really good model. But it kind of gives them a monolithic picture of what all AI does. And so one of the things I will often do is say, use something other than ChatGPT. And then I give them examples. You can use Sudowrite, you can use Infrikit, you can use Claude, you can use Gemini or whatever. And then have them kind of explore beyond that. And they actually find that helpful because then they can start to see this isn't just the way that AI responds, but actually these different AI models, like they work differently. They're working with different data sets, they have different models, things like that. And that kind of helps the conversation when you talk about AI literacy. Okay. Oh, for those under 18, how do we cope with these limitations when we consider FERPA COPPA laws? That's a really good example. I mean, one of the things that I might say, I started out as a high school teacher, although long before AI was part of the classroom. I mean, I would say you could demonstrate things as a group in class and have students like just have it all in the open so that you're using the system, and then have students suggest, so like I think actually it would be a blast in a high school class to have students train an AI on Gen Z language, or some sort of slang, right? And so that they would have some sort of expertise. The students would have some sort of expertise, and then you would be typing things in and you could all talk about it together, and it would be really open then. And you could talk about how the language models are working, not working, et cetera. I think we know that a lot of students are already, especially if they're under 18, a lot of them are using LLMs, especially ChatGPT, but we can't necessarily advocate it, as you note, because of certain laws. But that's what I would do, is kind of make it open and do it with myself as a teacher. Okay. Is there an issue of data privacy if you were to put a book you wrote into an LLM to generate images, like a lab manual? That's a really good question. So that gets into the ethics of AI stuff. I will say, so Microsoft Copilot right now has, their promise is that if you have the Copilot plugin, they're only using their own data and they're not sending it back to the ChatGPT model that they're integrating into it. And that's one reason why. So you could, so for instance, I'm using Microsoft Copilot to kind of try it out right now. I had a student's dissertation. I never would have put my student's dissertation into ChatGPT because I think that would be a violation of her privacy and her own work. But I put it into Microsoft Copilot after talking with her, and it did a summary of the dissertation, actually a pretty good summary. I was kind of trying to probe the limits of the model. And so that's one way of doing it. But you have to note that that's a kind of hazard of working with these systems, is that if you put the data in there, especially say, I wouldn't advocate for putting student data in there unless it's like very explicitly like, we're going to put this into an AI, like say the poll suggestion that I gave you, if like students are answering anonymously a sentence or two in a poll, and you say, what we're going to do with this is take all of our answers and then put it into the AI to get themes. I think that would be okay, but I wouldn't just take student writing in and then have it read through that because of data privacy issues. Okay, the co-authorship assignment. Yes, I could possibly share that. That is also built on an assignment partially designed by Carly Schnitzer, who is one of my co-editors on TextGenEd, so I'll have to ask her permission. Found any useful AI writing tools for writing processes that work with Microsoft Word. So that's Microsoft Copilot. I have mixed feelings about Microsoft Copilot. It's not as good as ChatGPT for a lot of things. And if you are old enough to remember Clippy, it reminds me a lot of Clippy because it kind of comes in and it wants to rewrite my emails and it wants to rewrite my work. And I'm not always down with that, but that's how it is. Okay. Oh, the Citizen Portal website. I saw that come in the chat, actually. That's pretty interesting. I think I haven't seen that one. I'm gonna have to look it up. I have two minds of it. So like on the one hand, I think that there's going to be a lot more kind of what is more like narrow AI. So like here are specific applications of LLMs that are designed for just doing this kind of thing, say interpreting politics kinds of things, right? And so I think those things are probably going to be useful. Some of those are going to be using RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation. So that is like what I said with Copilot. So it's like using a particular kind of body of documents and it's retrieving things from that document in order to answer. So that can be helpful. So it's less likely to hallucinate. On the other hand, I also know that there's going to be a lot of political kind of deliberate misinformation things here. And so Citizen Portal is not a site that I know of. So I would be a little bit concerned that whatever site is helping to digest political things may be kind of skewing towards one political angle or another. They may have some agenda for putting that out there. So that would be kind of the big question I would have, although that would be a super interesting thing to explore, say with a class about politics or rhetoric. Okay. Articles or books on the issue of ethics and privacy in generative AI. Janelle Shane's book is really the best, most accessible one. She talks a lot about the ethics and bias and stuff like that in really accessible ways. There's another book called The Ethical Algorithm, which I learned a lot about. It's by Michael Roth, and I'm forgetting the other last name. But it goes through a lot of kind of more technical, but relatively accessible explanations with examples about why, like, say, fairness and accountability and privacy, like these things are not, they're kind of in many ways in tension with each other in terms of data. And so it's a great example. Okay, and what advice would you offer to students who might use generative AI tools as shortcuts to their work? So actually, my Dear Students document works pretty well for that kind of, like, that's exactly what I tell them. So like, here are some things you need to know about this. I like to, you know, in part because I'm working with undergraduates, I want them to understand rhetorically why you might want to use these things and why you might not want to. I think it's much more productive than just saying, don't use them or use them or whatever, but like help give them kind of some orientation to it so that they can make those choices. Because after my class, you know, they're going to need to kind of move forward and do that work in the professions or, you know, whatever, right? Like they're going to have to make those decisions without some guidance. So that Dear Students document is kind of designed to help them think through those questions by giving them a little bit more information to make those, to deal with those questions. Okay. Oh, and then we have a question about librarians fitting into this conversation. I love this question. I am working with librarians at Pitt on AI literacy. I'm working actually with a number of different administrators, with people in the health sciences, in biology, and our Center for Teaching and Learning, in the libraries, et cetera. I think that these things are really better done as a kind of collective task force. I mean, for instance, I just visited a high school around here in Pittsburgh, and there was, you know, a whole bunch of teachers who got together on Wednesday afternoons to kind of talk through things. And I kind of, you know, did a little presentation. They told me how high school students were using it in their context. And I think these conversations are really helpful, especially across disciplines and across ranks, across all sorts of spaces, just because we all have different perspectives on how students are kind of grappling with these things. I think the more information we get, the better we can kind of respond to students' needs and what's going to be most helpful to them. Okay, how can we correct the problem of not all past texts in some important fields having made their way to the internet? That's an interesting question. I think, so I'm guessing you're talking about if we have data that's not fully represented in the data set, so that is like archival data that might be underrepresented, kind of communities, things like that, that are not already on the internet. I have mixed feelings about it because actually I think that the tech companies are very interested in collecting as much data as possible. And they are, I know, already starting to kind of knock on the doors of administrators, trying to look for student data because, of course, they want to kind of gauge things for students properly. They're also looking for data from archives, you know, say from underrepresented communities or underrepresented languages, things like that. I think we need to be really careful about giving that data away. So, so yeah, I mean, I guess it may or may not be a problem, but it's a really complex thing to think through. Okay, the Algorithmic Justice League. Yes, I do. So this is Joy Buolamwini's work. She is, in other examples, I have you know, kind of a whole thing on her work. So there's a number of people who are like, and much more kind of women of color, who are working on kind of helping people understand questions of AI literacy about bias in LLMs, about so Joy Buolamwini is particularly, she's a MIT AI graduate with a PhD, and she did work on facial recognition and how facial recognition is less likely to be accurate for women and people of color, Black people specifically, and she's a Black woman, so she's noting, you know, that it's like not recognizing her face and what are all the problems with it. She has some really fabulous kinds of interviews, podcasts. The Algorithmic Justice League has come up with a movie called Coding Bias. I think her book is out now too. So there's a lot of really wonderful resources to kind of support that. Actually, I'm not sure if it's in the resource list. I should share this, but there's a very brief presentation she gave early on in her career that's maybe only 5 minutes long, and it's AI Ain't I a Woman? Which there's a strong reference to Sojourner Truth's Ain't I a Woman speech. And she moves through this like beautiful performance of how AI is kind of not recognizing Black women specifically. And it's a really great way to show students like right away, like, here's some problems with bias. And it's a really great performance in video, and it's only like 5 minutes. So that's really helpful. I think I answered all the questions aside from questions of sharing resources, which I can follow up with. So thank you. Oh yeah, unmasking AI. Thank you for that. That's the right term for that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Annette. This was a fantastic session. I hope people took a lot. As a friendly reminder to everyone, this week's activity in AI Academy is to design your own assessment or activity or revamp one you already have. Stealing ideas from Annette or any of the resources you saw is very encouraged and welcome. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel, like start from what has already been done. As a reminder for everyone, all the resources that we have listed today with all the links and the recording will be in Disco. If you go to events and past, you will see them there. You will also get an email. Annette, thank you so much for your time. This was extremely valuable.
Thank you so much. And thank you for everybody for being here. It was great to meet you in the chat. Good luck. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely day.